When I started House of Holland, I was 22 and all I wanted to do was go out every night of the week. When I did start a ceramics company, when I was 38, it was the perfect alignment to who I was at 38.
Staying in.
It's staying in and looking at the mantelpiece, right? Looking at nice vases and turning on a nice lamp. You know, if people were critical of my work, it literally lights a fire in my stomach to go out and work harder, do things bigger, better. And I think that's something that isn't always healthy. My ability to concentrate and focus is so motivated by fun. Remember my mum having an argument with the maths teacher because he was like, he just doesn't concentrate and he just doesn't focus. And she instantly replied, was like, well, are you making it fun? And he was like, maths isn't fun. And she went, well, there's your problem. Home for me is really who's there. Home for me right now is with my husband and my dog. And that can be anywhere.
Hi, Henry.
Hi.
Should we start with a couple of caveats?
Yes.
I think we should. Caveat number one.
Yeah.
You've got the lurgy.
I have got the lurgy. I don't often sound this sexy, but I've luckily just saved this for you. I do. I'm coming through the other side of it, but not sure when this will be broadcast, but we're currently in the midst of the flu-nami.
Okay, so that's caveat number one. Caveat number two is that we're recording this in a room that is not officially ready for consumption, viewing.
I'm not even going to tell my husband we filmed it in here. We live it.
All right, so it's very good of you to allow us to do it in here, but it's the best place in terms of the setup, the acoustics.
Setup, acoustics, daylight, overrode the tens of thousands of pounds I've spent on renovating the upper floors of my home. But you go ahead, guys. I'm just here for your purposes, as you were.
Good. All right. Well, let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up north of Manchester in a place called Ramsbottom, which is now very chic and on the Sunday Times best places to live list.
Everywhere is.
Yeah. It's only 25, come on. And it was a great place to grow up. I grew up between my mum's house and my dad's house. So I split my time equally. I would change houses every Sunday, but they were both around the same area, like 5 minutes away from each other. So kind of quite a rural place, but not far away from Manchester.
So when did they break up, or were they never together, or what's the story there?
They broke up when I was around 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was it literally 1 week on, 1 week off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I think my mum's work meant that she worked away quite a lot. So as I got older, she would work away more often, and then I would stay for sort of 2 weeks at a time or 3 weeks at a time, just depending on her schedule. But I did that until I think when I was about 16, 17 maybe, my mum bought a 1-bedroom apartment. And so I got the message.
Okay. Well, we should come back to that because that's interesting. But I mean, looking back on it then, what was that like for you, having that, splitting the time between the two?
Yeah, I think for me it worked really well. I don't know how much you believe in astrology, but I'm a Gemini. I think we just have two very distinct sides. And that applies to lots of different areas of my life. I think in business and in work, I have a very intense creative side, but I also have a kind of more ordered, structured kind of business, financial side that I can tap into if I have to. It's my less favorite, but I'm able to. And then similarly with growing up, having those two different environments, they were structured quite differently. My dad's house was quite ordered. It had a lot more structure. My mum's less so, but that worked for me. I was able to kind of maneuver into both of those atmospheres quite well. I quite enjoyed it.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Did you have a preferred place to be?
Not really, depending on the time. I mean, my sister was at my dad's, and so I always enjoyed being there and spending time with my sister, but then me and my mum were really close, and so I loved spending time at my mum's. So, and when it was at my mum's, it was just me and my mum quite often. And so I loved that for different reasons. It was really fun. So no, I didn't have a favorite at all. They were just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why was your sister at your dad's then?
I think for her, the moving was too much. She's kind of her personality, she's less, she doesn't like change as much. She likes routine and things like that. Whereas I love change and I love things being different and, moving around and things I find really exciting. And whereas I think, as a teenage girl, kind of in her early teens, she just decided she wanted one bedroom and, all of her things in one place, really.
Mm-hmm. Is she younger or older? Older, okay. Yeah. Is there a sense that did you feel, are you a bit of a pleaser in some way, that you felt like you wanted to be with both of them in equal measure? Is there something about that maybe?
I'm definitely a bit of a people pleaser. I've got a song in my head now saying that line. I'm a people pleaser. Who is that? It's an awful song to have in your head as well. It's going to be there for all day. I guess so. But no, I just never felt like I needed to choose. I felt okay having the two spaces. It worked for me. I loved spending time with my mum, and she wasn't there all the time. She moved and traveled for work. And
why was she traveling then? What did she do?
Her work, she was a management training consultant. She worked a lot, and she worked a lot in hotels, and she would do kind of training courses, off-site training courses. And then later, when I was about 12, she bought a chateau in central France. And so gradually that became more and more of her work. And she would spend more and more of the year over in France. So she renovated that from being kind of quite dilapidated chateau that was being kind of lived in maybe 4 rooms into like 16 suites. And it was kind of a wedding venue and a chambre d'hôte and bed and breakfast. And so she was out there for the majority of the summer months, kind of May to October. And that was just a gradual transition, I guess, as I kind of got through school. And got a bit older. So I think maybe when I was about 16, 17, she bought a smaller place in the UK and spent more time in France. And so I would be out in France to see her in holidays and, do my A-levels.
Was that okay, though, that you saw less of her at that point?
Yeah, it was fine. It was fine. Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely fine. Fine sounds like I'm kind of denying that it wasn't fine. It's fine. I know. I'm like, I need to think of a better word. It was great because when I did spend time with her, it was for elongated periods and out in France. So it was my holidays, it was my summers and Easters and Christmases, and they were just really special times for different reasons.
Yeah. Am I right in saying that she also did some sort of meditation work as well?
Yeah, she did. So she kind of went on a really holistic spiritual journey that started with her first breast cancer diagnosis, which was when I was around 8. And she went to Vipassana, which is a really intense 5-day meditation course where you can't speak. You sleep on straw mattresses, you meditate 8 hours a day. It's like a really intense process. And she did that. And ever since after that, she would meditate every morning. So I'd come down and get ready for school and she'd be sat cross-legged in the middle of the living room under a shawl and it'd scare the shit out of me in the dark. And then that sort of really started a kind of more holistic approach to her kind of health and medicine. And then she got really into aromatherapy. She was always into homeopathy. I remember from being really little, I was, for my hay fever, I was always on pollens and grasses that I would take early spring to kind of build up my resistance for later in the summer. But then that kind of just evolved and got more intense. I think when she started that more holistic journey, from me being kind of 8 to 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did she teach you how to meditate?
Bits. So she used to do she did the silver technique as well, which she would teach me.
What's that?
This technique where you sort of hold the sort of the 3 fingers of your 2 hands together, and then when you close your eyes you look down. It feels very unnatural. So like when you close your eyes naturally look up to the sky, but then if you look down, I think it's called going to center. That was something she taught me. Positive affirmations with Louise Hay, she would teach me. Manifesting, she taught me. She wrote books about living like positive thought and, power of the mind as well. She had a book called Living Positively with Henry Holland. Yeah, so there's kind of a real belief system that she kind of instilled in me.
So practically, how would you manifest something?
So practically, manifesting really is just about like really seeing and believing what it is that you want. It's not about sitting back and waiting for it to happen by any means. You know, I think there's some people that have this resistance to the manifesting as a term, that they think people just think if they manifest it, it's going to happen. But it's really about like really believing that you can. For me, it's more about believing that you can achieve what it is you set out to achieve, and manifesting that, and manifesting the finished results. And I think when you look at my career and the fact that I started a fashion business with zero training at 22 and no clue and £200 in my pocket, and then again at 38, I started a ceramics business after having 3 evening classes. I guess that is a reflection of my ability to be able to kind of believe that I am able to achieve the things that I set out to achieve. It's not about an arrogance by any means, because I definitely, work really hard to achieve the things that I set out to achieve. But I think one of the biggest roadblocks for so many people is a lack of belief in themselves that they can do certain things. They're like, oh, I could never do that because of X, Y, and Z. I just haven't had that internal saboteur voice to the same level because of the belief system that I was brought up on.
That's great, isn't it?
I think. Yeah. It's a real gift.
It's a real gift, isn't it? Okay, so sounds like your mum taught you a lot on that front. What about your dad? What did you take from him, do you think?
So I learned so much from my dad as well. My dad had the same job from graduate. He's a lawyer. He was a conveyancer. He ran his own company, he ran his own business. And, just understanding what that meant to work for yourself, and, that having a job wasn't necessarily just about a 9 to 5. It was about building something and growing something and, working around that to make that happen. I think I've got a really strong work ethic. And also, my dad doesn't necessarily practice manifestation or positive thinking, but his unwavering belief in me has also allowed me to continue on that path. When I was 22 and I started House of Holland, my fashion company, my parents had put their pensions into a flat for me and my best friend to buy. And so rather than pay rent, we would just pay the mortgage, and then everyone got their money back with the increases, and everyone did really well out of it, by the way. But, even though my parents had put their money into this house, and so I had a mortgage, and I found my dad at 22, and I had a full-time job in magazines, and I was like, I'm giving up my job to make these T-shirts that say "Flick your bean" on them. He was like, great, go for it. I think that he's never questioned my decisions. He's always been really, really encouraging in anything that I've set out to do. And then when, I went through an administration and my fashion business was sold off, both him and my stepmom were just so encouraging and so reassuring. They were like, we're not worried about you. You're going to be fine, And like, when I had those moments where I could have potentially gone into a moment of self-doubt and pity and misery of like, oh, everything I've worked for has gone away and, I've failed or whatever, it was their voice just saying, you're going to be fine. Honestly, we have this, we completely believe in you. And I think what I learned from them is that whatever it is that I set out to do, as long as I try my best at it and, I set out to do it well, then go for it, really.
So a lot of the people I talked to on the podcast, they talk quite similarly about parents who instilled in them certain values that they've taken through and helped them be successful. Often they also talk about some kind of adversity that they had to deal with when they were young as well, or instead of. In your case, can you pinpoint anything on that front? I mean, what was the most sort of difficult time of your childhood, do you think?
The most difficult time in my childhood was me being bullied for being gay at an all-boys school. I went to a very traditional all-boys school when I was about 8 years old. We had to call the female teachers sir.
Seriously?
Yeah. Wow. This is in 1990, I guess. And the female teacher was like, oh, it's just easier. There's only a couple of us. Because accidentally you'd be like, oh, sir, oh, sorry, miss, They'd be like, we called female teachers sir. which my mum being a massive feminist was really struggled with. But it was the school that all of my family went to. My dad, my mum went to the same school, but there was separate boys' schools and girls' schools, and they were very kind of culturally very different, the boys' school and the girls' school. So it was a boys' school of like 1,200 boys. Pretty early on, as is often the case, the bullies figured out I was gay before I did.
What age are we talking here?
I was my first year in senior school, so 11, just 11 going into 12. And I really struggled with that. And I really went insular. I really went in on myself. Again, it's thanks to my parents that really recognized that wasn't right for me. It was, it was a challenge for my dad in a way, because it was like a tradition. It was a tradition that all of us went to the same school, but it was actually my stepmom and my mum who, really encouraged him to let me move to a different school. And so I moved to a much smaller school, a bit further away, but I was a big fish in a small pond, and that just suited me really well. And I was just really able to be myself. And on the first day at that school, I met my best friend, who still my best friend to this day, who I ran my fashion company with for 15 years together. So it was a really special place where, I was just able to be who I was.
So you said that the bullies figured out your sexuality before you did. So talk me through that. I mean,
I guess so. I mean, or before I was ready to, or willing to, I guess it's coming to terms with being gay is not something I didn't struggle with it that much, really, to be honest, because my like everyone in my mum's life was gay. Like all of my mum's friends were like David and Justin. It wasn't like Anne and Phil. So like, whenever my mum's friends came for holidays or Christmases or, dinner parties, it was definitely not, a heteronormative environment by any means. If anything, it was like, it was a bit too easy, like I think when you're coming to terms of being gay, it's you're always you build it up in your head that it's like a much bigger deal for everybody else than it is. And they already know and they don't care, but you kind of build it up into this sort of thing that's kind of makes you panic. So I came out about 17, 18, but only didn't come out sooner because almost didn't want to give my parents the satisfaction of being right. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're an 18-year-old, you don't want to like give your parents like the justification, funny. But it is just a worry, it's like this secret that you're carrying, I guess.
Yeah.
But sort of when I was in that all boys school, a really masculine environment, it was all about football. It was all about army cadets. It was a very traditional environment. And then when I did find my parents recognized something was wrong, I was, becoming really quiet and insular, and, they went to the school to talk about it. I told them that I was being bullied, and the headmaster paraded me around the school with him to point out the bullies. Like, it's just not how hopefully that's not how that is managed in today's world. And I'm so glad that it was pre-phones and social media, because I don't know how I would have dealt with that. But they didn't really manage it very well. And so, I went, which was a real blessing. And I went to a much better environment where I was encouraged to be myself, and I felt comfortable to be myself. And it was less academic, which I guess was one of my dad's concerns. But
you're happy.
I was happy.
Yeah.
And I got enough to I got enough to do my A-levels, and then I got enough A-levels to go to university. So what else is there?
The bullying period, how do you reflect on that in terms of has it sort of contributed to anything, do you think? Or
yes, it definitely has contributed to a inbuilt, incessant need to prove people wrong if I think they don't believe I can do something. It's a bit like I need to prove those bullies that I can achieve whatever it is I want. And then I think, later working in fashion or working in any creative field, to be honest, when your work is critiqued and reviewed, and yet it's as an objective point of view whether something is good or not, then that kind of fight was reignited. You know, if people were critical of my work, or if people are critical of me ever, it literally lights a fire in my stomach to go out and work harder, do things bigger, better, harder, faster, and prove them wrong, really. And I think that's something that isn't always healthy. You know, I can often work myself to sound like this.
Yeah.
Pretty much this time of year, every year, my body gives up just 2 weeks before the holidays.
Yeah.
Like I almost get there, and then my body's like, nah, too far.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't always kind of look after myself as much as I should, because I'm trying to, there's a need to prove something to myself as well, I think, as well.
So interesting, isn't it?
But I'm always thankful for that.
Are you?
That fire. Yeah. Like I'm almost thankful. Like that period, I remember that period being so dark and so miserable. And thank God it was only about a year of my life. And that, again, is thanks to my parents, you know, for recognizing that I needed to be somewhere else and allowing me to do that. And I'm so grateful. But at the same time, it did really instill in me this need to like a real, like, I'll show you kind of thing. And I think that has been reflective of my career throughout the years.
Yeah. I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. Where did your interest in fashion come from?
I was always obsessed with fashion for as long as I can remember. When I was really little, because I had the two homes, my parents, we would go shopping and I'd buy, my clothes were always bought in outfits. So everything always had a corresponding top and a bottom, or like the t-shirt with the matching shorts, or the jumper with the matching trousers or whatever. And whenever we were buying me clothes, I'd buy everything twice. So I'd have one set at my mum's house and one set at my dad's house. And then obviously as you get older and you have more personal choice and personal style, you want to buy your own things and you get your own allowance and pocket money, whatever. So then I would start to move my clothes with me, and I would just go into the wardrobe and just gather all the hangers, just like squish them all together and then place them in the boot of the car, and then get to the next house and then hang them back up. I got it down to like a fine art. Literally, I could swap out, it would like take me 10 minutes. And so I don't know, just from really early on, I recognized the power of fashion and its ability to kind of connect you to the people you wanted to be connected to in terms of style tribes. In schools and as a teenager, you sort of dress to attach yourself to the tribe you want to be attached to, right? So I was a skateboarder, wear lots of baggy pants and wallet chains and hoodies when I was like about 13, 14. We grew up next to a dry ski slope, so I used to go snowboarding as well, like 2 nights a week. And so that was kind of our style. I don't know, I just really loved fashion from being, you know, my earliest memories would be like going shopping with my mum and my sister and like being so excited to like run off by myself and find them a pair of shoes to match the skirt that they just bought. Just typical little gay kid running around Marks and Spencer's trying to look for a court shoe in a primrose yellow, pretty much. But then when I started to think about what I was going to study, I got some really good advice from a friend of my mum's. He said, you know, I was like, I kind of want to do something in like fashion and media. And it was when media studies was like first a thing. But then there was this real thing of like, media studies isn't a proper degree or whatever. People were quite like, you know, dismissive of it. And a friend of my mum's who was in that world, she said, why don't you do a journalism degree? Because then you're learning a skill that you can apply to any sphere. In the future, you can write about sport, you can write about, never going to happen, you can write about fashion, you can write about architecture, you can write about travel, anything you want to, that you'll later, you know, figure out is what you want to, you know, the world you want to be a part of, then journalism is a really good route to any of those things. And I thought that was, looking back, really amazing advice. I'm really grateful for it. So I did do that. Mm-hmm. And I did a journalism degree. And then in my head, journalism encompassed, you know, writing for The Face and Dazed and Confused and ID. And that was my world of journalism. And then I went to my first week of lectures and it was about theology and politics, and the lecturers were like, when you go and work for the local newspaper and work your way up to the news desk, and then you eventually start to work on the features department at the Guardian, and I was like, oh God, made a mistake. And so I tried to move to a fashion course after 4 days.
4 days, wow.
Because I was at the London College of Printing, which is part of the University of the Arts. So it was Centre St Martin's, London College of Fashion, London College of Printing, and another one, I think, which is now London College of Communications. And I was in these halls of residence, and the halls were, some students were from St Martin's, some students were from London College of Fashion in my flat. So I was surrounded by these fashion students, and then was just like, hang on, all these people are doing fashion. And like some of the people doing fashion weren't even into fashion as much as I was. And I was like, I'm doing the wrong thing here. And so I tried to change my course. And the course director was like, it's too late. You know, I'd love to meet with you and talk about this, but come back next year. And I'm far too impatient. That's another thing. You know, when I set my mind to doing something, I'm hell-bent on doing it until it's achieved. And so I was like, I'm not waiting a year. I'll just get on and do this journalism degree, but I will do everything that I can around that to build fashion credentials. So I set about emailing and contacting anyone that I had any sort of route to literally be an intern to work with them in the fashion sphere. And so around my degree, I was doing all of these different internships. I did an internship at Fairchild that has like W and Women's Wear Daily. I was like a stylist assistant for someone that used to work for like Dazed and Confused. And then I found myself as a fashion assistant intern at a teen magazine called Smash Hits and Sneak. And never left, basically. Fell in love with it. Fell in love with the team, fell in love with the people that was working there. Some of my closest friends, but just the idea of working in the world of fashion, but in this space that wasn't too serious, that didn't take itself too seriously. And then after a few months, my boss left to move jobs. And I think I was 21 and they interviewed me for the fashion editor job. So while I was, throughout my degree, I was working 2 days as a fashion assistant.
Okay.
For my final 2 years. And then I did my last exam on the Friday, started full-time at the magazine on the Monday. So went straight through into work.
Okay.
Didn't have a day off. It was like, I remember going to get our results for our degree and then going into the office in the afternoon and everyone being like, how'd you do? And I was already working full-time. It was great.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned the word friendships there, and I wanted to ask you about friendships.
Yes.
Because that seems to me such a key ingredient of who you are as well.
Huge.
So you, a very good friend of yours, Agnes Dean, the model, was, correct me if I'm wrong, but seemed to be the face of that whole moment, that sort of generation.
The face of indie sleaze, it's now been coined. But indie sleaze wasn't really a term back then. But she of a real moment in time, for sure, cultural moment in time.
Cultural moment in time. So how did you meet her?
So we met Agnes. She used to work in the chip shop in the village next to where I grew up. We met through friends at about age 13, I think. You know, when you go to like the local nightclub, when you manage to blag your way in at 15, we used to go to the same nightclub, you know, like underage drink in the same pubs and things like that. And I was always kind of like, I think you should be a model. And I was like really into the sort of fashion scene. I was always encouraging her to try out for doing modelling stuff. And then she got an agency up in Manchester when I had just started at university. So she used to come and share my single bed when she got jobs down in London. And then after my second year at university, we moved in together and lived together in London. So she was sort of a jobbing model in London and I was doing my third year in my degree. And then we bought a house together and then lived together until she moved to New York in about 2009, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So like really close friends, but like my entire world is built on my chosen family for sure. Again, that's something that I really learned a lot from my mom. I think she really instilled in me the importance of friendships and how people are more than that.
Chosen family.
Your chosen family. And we, I don't have any issues with my family. We love each other and we get on really well, but my chosen family is just as important to me and has been so pivotal in my life. I think I moved to London at 18. I've now been here longer than I was up north. So I've been here for 24 years. And that whole time period of adulthood has been supported and uplifted and, really like taken through that period thanks to my chosen family. And also running my own companies and working for myself, that has also played into my, I'm so aware and grateful of the fact that one of the biggest privileges you have when you run your own business is choosing who you get to spend your day with, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And so I started my first company with my best friend, and now I run my ceramics company with my husband. And so I thrive in that way of building something with people that I love is so much a part of my working life.
So who else is in your chosen family?
Oh, so many. My oldest, I have so many friends from up north. We have a really close-knit group of friends who now all live down here. So people are often like, but you still sound quite northern. It's because I spend my time with northerners. I might live here, but I spend my time with just northerners. My best friends Neil and Jess and Monkey, like we grew up together in the north, and now we just sort of migrated together.
It's really nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that whole mid-noughties period.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot going. Like you were at a lot of parties, weren't you? Let's be honest.
So many people refer to me being at a lot of parties, and you're right. I was in my mid-20s. I was living in Camden, and I started to get invited to every party going, pretty much. So who isn't going to go to those parties? But I think my slight frustration with it is I'm often asked. I remember going for some funding once from applying to a fund and I presented my business plan, and it was completely proficient, and I taught my way through the balance sheet and the P&L and my 5-year projections. This is what I'm going to do with your funding, and this is how I'm going to spend it, and this is why. And one of the older ladies on the panel was like, well, how are you going to do all this? Because we all know you don't stay in every night. And I sort of lost it a little bit because that's a real frustration for me. And I was like, well, actually, I get paid to go out most nights of the week. And then when I get paid, I then go to the factory in the morning and release the goods that I haven't been able to pay for, or I go to bloody suppliers and buy buttons. Like I was DJing, and it was a way of me generating funds to keep my business going quite often. And I'm 22, so what? at the same time. But yes, it was a really exciting time where we were part of a real sort of cultural movement. And also that from a business perspective, the clothes I was making was very much built around that frenetic energy of like that scene and that kind of, that nightlife scene. And, I was making clothes for people to wear to all of these parties. And so it really played into my career to be seen as that party guy. And it worked. And it allowed me to build a real community and a real kind of personality and a real sort of essence around the brand that I was building. And I think one of the reasons that I struggled further down the line with maintaining the brand to the same level was because I was tired. I was like, I was in my mid to late 30s, and I no longer wanted to go out 5 nights a week, and yet the brand that I'd created had its roots so deeply embedded in that scene, and I was creating these sort of clothes for pop stars and to wear to parties and nightclubs, and that was kind of the vibe of the brand that we created. And when you create a really strong essence of a brand, it can it's its strength as long as it still authentically connects to you as the figurehead. And when it wasn't doing that anymore, I struggled. And that's why when I did start a ceramics company when I was 38, it was the perfect alignment to who I was at 38.
Staying in.
It's staying in and looking at the mantelpiece, right? Looking at nice vases and turning on a nice lamp.
Yeah.
But like, when I started House of Holland, I was 22 and all I wanted to do was go out every night of the week. And so it was the perfect reflection of who I was. And that's why it was an authentic brand that was built off this real sense of authenticity. I just made slogan t-shirts because all I wanted to wear to the club nights that I was going to were slogan t-shirts. And, in these acid bright colors. And then when I got to 38, all I wanted to do was, make pottery and listen to a podcast. And that's what I built a business on. So I have to be kind of doing something that is really authentically connected to who I am in that moment.
It makes a lot of sense.
And so I think to a lot of people, you're like, from fashion to ceramics, it's quite a jump. But to me, it feels very normal.
Can I just pick up on something you said? Did you get paid then to go to a lot of these parties? Is that how it works?
Yeah.
And they want you there with your buddies for a photo.
Yeah.
And who's paying for that? The brand that's holding the event.
Yeah.
So interesting. It's so interesting.
I'm being really cagey. Yeah. It's an entire industry.
Yeah.
Paid to party is an entire industry. Paris Hilton claims she started it. She's probably right. But if you're a PR company hosting an event and you want to get that event publicized in certain media, then it becomes but back then, to be honest, more often than not, I went because it was free bar. And, I was 24.
Well, also, if you can all be wearing your slogan t-shirts, then happy days.
Exactly, right? And when you're in your mid-20s, you've got the energy and the appetite to do it. And, you don't want to miss out. There's a real sense of fear of missing out. And you want to be a part of those cultural moments. And we were having the time of our lives. I think when House of Holland finished, I was really reflective and I looked back over the period and I didn't have a single regret of how anything happened. And I was just so overwhelmed with gratitude that I got to do what I did for nearly 15 years. And I had the time of my life. It was literally, I couldn't imagine anything more suited to what I dreamt of doing and being in my 20s.
So given that, what was it like when it went into administration? It was 2020, wasn't it?
2020, it was just as we went, it was literally as we went into the pandemic.
Yeah. How did it feel?
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It was heartbreaking. It was devastating. But I think it was probably the year running up to that for me, because you're having to keep a brave face on, knowing the challenges behind the scenes, but knowing that every single month you're awake for like weeks on end worrying about the salaries, because you've got 20 people in the room whose rent you're responsible for. And as I said, I've always seen my teams at work as a chosen family as well as, not at work. And I really felt the pressure and the weight of the struggles that we were going through. And you sort of feel it in isolation because you can't really share it with the team. It's not appropriate to let them know how on the edge things are. And at the same time, you're trying to do every single thing that you can to maintain and protect everything. And it's the year before. The minute you make the decision is when all of that pressure lifts off your shoulders. My shoulders physically and figuratively were like up by my ears for a good 2 years. And the minute I made that decision that it was the right thing to do to put it into administration and it was sold on, a lot of that pressure lifted because, I wasn't holding all of that tension in myself anymore. And then very quickly I moved into that place of gratitude, of just like so grateful that I was able to do what I did for so long, and just really proud and excited to look back at all the things that I did achieve. But I think it was the year prior to the actual decision that was the really heartbreaking time.
And then where did the pivot into homewares come from?
Pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I think it was about 2 or 3 months. I had maybe a couple of months off. Obviously, we were all in lockdown. I really quickly realized that I needed a creative output. So not necessarily a creative outlet, but an output. Like I just love making things. And I love the process of having an idea, developing a product, creating that, and that then becoming a physical thing. And I really quickly realized, initially I was like, I'll just consult for other people and I'll tell them how to spend their money and I won't have the pressure of having to find the money to make the ideas a reality. And very quickly I realized that whilst that was, less pressured, it wasn't really kind of fulfilling my sort of thirst and need to create things. And so I started having some ceramics lessons, sort of evening classes. And I had, I think, 3 or 4. And then the lockdowns got more and more intense. And it was, we were able to stretch it a little bit more because it was an educational activity. And so we were able to kind of bend it a little bit. And then lockdowns just got worse and worse. And then it was no longer possible to kind of go and have these classes anymore. So I just ordered a lot of clay to the kitchen. And that Christmas, when we were not even allowed to see family, that first one, I was just in the kitchen making tableware. And my husband was like, will you shut up? I'm trying to watch a film. And I ordered all these clays to the house and I was just making it at the kitchen table, like literally physically at the kitchen table. And then sort of at moments when we were allowed to, going to use the kilns at the place where I'd had these classes. And that's when it kind of started, really. And then my teacher who taught me ceramics, she moved back to Istanbul because travel was getting kind of cut off and she was worried she was not going to be able to get back to her family. And so she moved back to Istanbul and I was like, who's taking your studio? And she was like, no one. I was like, I'll have it. So then I really quickly had my own studio. And then it grew really quickly. So it was a shared studio of 5 people. And one of those people still works with me today. So I got my first order from Liberties when it was just me on my own making these pots. And they ordered 500 pieces, 600 pieces. And my husband was like, well, you can't do that. And I was like, of course I can. I was like, I'll figure it out. I'll make it happen. And so I went into the shared studio the next day and just looked around the room and was like, anyone want a job? And a couple of them did and helped me. And now one of them still works with me today. So I sort of really commandeered that shared studio space for a few months. I was quite cheeky. I was like, do you need that shelf? Do you need that shelf? And then quickly got my own studio and kind of it built from there.
Well, you're sitting next to one of your lamps and there's quite a lot of your pieces in here. So let's talk about this house then.
Yeah.
It's very much a house of 2 halves, isn't it? So explain that.
It is. It's a house of 2 halves. And I don't know if you noticed, but the garden as you enter the house is also one of 2 halves. So the house is double fronted. On one side of the house, the garden's been landscaped and done. On the other side, it hasn't. So it's giving people an idea of what they're about to enter, right? So one side of the garden we've kept because we know we have still loads to rip out and it's going to just have to sit and ruin any garden that gets done in the first. So we're holding that space. So we started the renovation of the house last year and we did the renovation from the top down. So any mess just sort of comes out through the house rather than kind of doing the ground floor and then doing the attic and just taking all that dust and mess up back through all those nicely done rooms.
Why didn't you do it all at once?
We didn't do it all at once because we couldn't afford it, quite simply, yeah. This house is it's a bigger house than our last house. Like we really stretched ourselves to buy a bigger home. And so, we didn't have the money left over to do all the renovation all at once. And then shortly after buying it, my, career changed dramatically. And I was building a business and, I'm sure building a business and, trying to build a home at the same time is really challenging. You've kind of got one pot of money and it's like, do I build and grow the business the way that I want to, or do I kind of, focus on the house? So it's just a juggling act and we're doing it slowly. Also, we wanted to live in our previous house. We bought the house and also, did that classic of like made sure there was enough money left over on the mortgage to do all the renovations all at once. So we lived in it for literally a matter of weeks and then tore the whole thing down and redid it in one go. And I think so many things then, once we lived in it, in hindsight, we would have done differently because of the way we lived within the space and understanding, the light in different rooms and understanding the way that you kind of, the flow of the space and, how you want to use certain rooms. So we wanted to live in it for a little bit anyway, to understand it properly and make sure we didn't make any rushed decisions, but also the realities of renovating a house all at once. We just didn't have the money.
So this is currently the kind of...
We're currently in the unrenovated bit.
Yeah. Unrenovated sitting room with a Victorian bay window.
Yeah.
And then you're going to... This is going
to become the kitchen. And where I'm sat, the wall behind me is going to be knocked out for an entrance down into a dining room. And then the current kitchen, which is very small, is going to move into here.
Yeah. Excuse the brief interruption. If you're interested in taking a look around Henry's house, the video tour is available to insiders on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/homingwithmatt. Back to the podcast. So you share it with your husband, David.
I do.
And your dog.
And my dog, Larry.
Larry the pug.
Larry the pug, who's a new addition, yeah. We've been here for about 4 years nearly now. But we've been in this area. So we're in Victoria Park in East London, and we've been in this area now for like just over 10 years. So we love the area and love being close to the park.
Well, I was going to ask you about this because I'm really interested in this idea of, where we belong geographically.
Yeah.
So you're from the north.
Yes.
As you say, you and a bunch of your friends are settled in London.
Yeah.
If I was to ask you to pick a 3 words location anywhere on the planet as to where you're from, where do you belong? Where is home geographically? What would you say?
I would say in Victoria Park in East London for sure. I think that's where I've felt most at home. I lived in Camden for 12 years and sort of Chalk Farm, Primrose Hill, when all the northerners just went to the northernmost part of London, just at the end of the M1. We didn't get very far, but it's fine. The Hawley Arms and Amy Winehouse were there, so it was cool. And then when we started to look to buy, there was just no way we could afford to live in that area. We spent a lot of time east because, there was so much kind of nightlife and so many restaurants and kind of things happening in the East End, but we'd never lived here. But then when we found Victoria Park, it was kind of the best of both worlds. We had so much green space. I need to see a horizon at some point in my day. And the only real place you get to do that in London is in one of the parks and, having that sense of space. I always lived next to Primrose Hill and we always had that space. And you can see the horizon. And growing up where I grew up, it's actually really rural. It's close to Manchester, but it's really rural. And you just, you're driving through these rolling hills and valleys and it's really beautiful landscape. When I go back now and look at it, I can appreciate its beauty. At the time, it was constricting and there was one bus an hour and my friends were all 45 minutes away and I disliked it. But now when I go back, I appreciate its beauty and I appreciate those things. I see those horizons and those kind of rolling hills and I feel like I need that element of space in London, and we have that being in Victoria Park.
Yeah, that's great.
There's a real sense of community and a real sense of village. My husband grew up in a tiny village in the Lake District. And so he's kind of very much about city living. He never wants to live in the countryside, but here there's this real sense of we know the landlord at the pub. I play tennis with the landlord, and we know other people in the village, and we know the shopkeepers, and we know it's got a real feeling that you're living in a village, and yet we can go into central London and it used to be half an hour. It's about 50 minutes now.
Routines and rituals.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about those. What's a typical day?
I love change, as I said, but I also, I do actually really value routine and ritual. So my current ritual since getting the new puppy is I get up every morning and given the time of year, and we walk around the park for sunrise. So we leave at 7, and by the time I get back, the sun's risen, and it's a really amazing start to the day. And it really kind of sets me up. And it's when I start to think about what I've got on for the day. There's always the same point in the park where I check the bank. I don't know what it is, but there's something about like, I sort of start to think about, okay, I've got to do that, I've got to do that. And I start thinking about like the sort of more businessy stuff when I hit a certain point in the park, and I'm always like, find myself checking the bank balance on that part. It's weird. But like, I take a big old mug of coffee and I sort of walk around the park, and it's sacred. There's something that's really sacred to me, just that sort of first hour of the day. And I'm usually on my own. And then by the time like David's then got the house to get himself ready for when I get back. And that's a real ritual. I used to go to a gym in the city 3 days a week. And again, that routine, I would get up really early, cycle into the city, but having a new puppy, I've had to change when I go to the gym because he takes precedent. But so rituals and routines, it's definitely that. And I always have a bath on a Sunday night, which my dad thinks is hilarious. He thinks I'm like an old washerwoman because I have a Sunday night bath. Well, I'm like, a Sunday night, a shave, and I have a bath.
Explain why you have a bath on a Sunday.
I don't know. It's like a last moment of relaxation before my head gets into the week ahead. I suffer quite badly with Sunday scaries, for sure. Like the first day back at work is coming, it's approaching. And so I think my bath is my last attempt to stave that off. And from my school days, Sunday scaries were really intense because I'd have to change house and then I'd have to finish off my homework, and all of that. And I was not a huge fan of school. So
do you still go to the gym?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that an important part of your week?
It is, yeah. It's less structured at the moment just because I usually work. I've had a trainer for like 5 years and it would always be 3 times a week. So it was always very structured. So it's really unstructured at the moment. I have just put it on hold to prioritize dog training at the moment. But I will get back onto it.
And in terms of your overall sort of self-care, is there anything else that you do to just make sure that you're, staying on the rails? Because you're obviously very, very busy, right?
Yeah. I was seeing a therapist for quite a while, and that was really helpful and really useful. I think when my mum passed away, I just instantly got a therapist because I knew that was something I was going to need to deal with, and I wanted to do it properly and at the right time and not wake up in 3 years' time thinking that I hadn't dealt with that loss and situation.
When did that happen?
That happened about 4 years ago. Yeah.
Was it out of the blue or?
No, her breast cancer came back. She had secondary breast cancer. So we knew that she had that and that her diagnosis was terminal. But as I said earlier, her approach to medicine was incredibly holistic. And so she chose a completely holistic treatment path for herself and didn't have any Western treatment. And she had 5.5 years, which was completely blew away any predictions that any of the doctors sort of had for her had she taken more conventional, chemotherapy or radiotherapy routes. So
that's amazing, isn't it? So she had a terminal diagnosis and then 5.5 years.
So secondary breast cancer by definition is terminal.
Yeah.
Because if it comes back, it is deemed as terminal. And this time it came back in her chest wall and into her lungs. But still a breast cancer, if that makes sense. Because so they still treat it as a breast cancer, even if it's gone to a different place. But it had metastasized and gone into her bones as well. But she lived a pretty normal life around her treatments for good 3.5, 4 years.
So how do you look back on that time now? Well, that must have been very hard for you.
I try not to let myself think about this part too much, but frustrated and a bit angry that it was COVID and we weren't able to spend as much time together as we would have. So sad about that part, but also just really grateful that we still had those additional years. Also really grateful that she got to see this new career path of mine. She was so much a part of my fashion career. And, my fashion shows would, for weeks afterwards, people were like, oh my God, I met your mum at the show. But 600 people would tell me that. And I'm like, how did she meet 600 people in the space of 19 minutes? I don't get it. But she somehow, I think people gravitated towards her as much as she did to them, knowing who she was. But she basically held court at my shows and she'd be like, oh, and I met this person, this actress, and this person. So she was also like a real creative inspiration for me as well. And so losing her was really difficult. But she was around to see my ceramics business start.
Yeah.
And I used to, she used to be on FaceTime for a couple of hours while I was making a vase in the evenings, and we'd just chat, and she'd be sort of watching what I was doing while I was doing it. So, yeah, like, grief is like awful, and losing a parent is shit, but you've kind of got to think about it in a different way and just be grateful for having that time with that person, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad died probably, I think it's 2019, so a little bit longer ago, but it's interesting grief, isn't it? Because it does come at you, I find, in relatively abstract ways when you don't expect it.
It does, and I think that the grief doesn't get any less. It's just that life just gets bigger to the point that it kind of it surpasses the grief, if that makes sense. And so if you think about it, or you tap into that grief, or if, something happens to trigger a thought, or like if you miss that person, or you wish that they were around for something, then it can become quite overwhelming again. But no. Also, my mum was incredibly spiritual. She spoke to dead people all the time. Like, one of the last conversations we have was, which one of your psychic friends are we going to talk through once you've gone? Because so many of your friends do that.
Yeah.
And so, we agreed which psychic we were going to communicate through if we needed to, and things like that. So that's reassuring to me in many ways. And, I feel her presence around me so much in everything that I do. And it's almost more so because her physical presence is gone. I know that she can be everywhere, and she pretty much probably is. So
that's really nice. So you said you've had some psychotherapy.
I did.
Was that helpful?
It was really helpful. Yeah. Just to kind of really make a point of exploring the feelings of grief, and what I was going through, and also looking back at, therapists love to look back at your childhood, don't they?
They do a bit, yeah.
Explore why you think the way you think, or maybe why you behave the way you behave. And I found it really, really useful. And I tap in and out now. If I'm going through something, I'll give her a shout and go back for a few months. And but I kind of was doing it consistently for about 2 years. I just was intensely aware that this was probably one of the biggest things I was going to have to deal with in my life. And I just wanted to make sure that I didn't wake up in 3 years' time in rehab, having suppressed it and not thought about it, and, drinking my way through it for 2 years or whatever.
That's really great though, isn't it? Doing it proactively.
Yeah. I think it was definitely a good idea. Yeah, for me. And I think having that lead up, knowing it was coming, was not fun at all, but it allowed you to kind of process in your head in a certain way,
So in terms of your mental health, because I know you've talked about it before and you're very open about it, which I think is really good. If you're in a low moment or a difficult moment, how does it manifest itself for you? Is it anxiety? Is it feeling down? Is it insomnia? How does it
All of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above, but at different times in my life, interestingly. So when I was like 18, 19, 20, I struggled a lot with anxiety. And I was just in an abject panic about getting my life up and going. And, and I was like desperate to be something when I wasn't yet. And I was working too much, and I was going out too much, and I was still at university, and I was trying to do just too much. And I just had a complete sort of like, I don't know, nervous breakdown is the right term, but my nerves were just shot, and I just was suffering really badly with anxiety and panic attacks. And it really struggled for a good year with anxiety attacks, and couldn't get the tube anywhere. And, I was couldn't really sort of be in busy spaces, and then that manifested with insomnia, and then all you need when you're going through those kind of like anxiety moments is rest, and then wasn't able to, and etc. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle. But I learned to deal with that at the time. My mum sent me to hypnotherapy, and I found that really incredibly helpful for that.
Really?
Yeah, specifically for anxiety, it really worked.
What did you do then, out of interest?
So through hypnotherapy, I was taught how to make myself have a panic attack. And then in turn, that told me that I was the one doing it to myself. And when you know you're the one causing the panic attack, it's really easy to be like, what are you doing? Stop it, you know? Whereas I think when people first experience an anxiety attack, you think you're dying, you think... For the first time anyway, you're like, you've no idea what's happening. You think you're having a heart attack. You think you're about to collapse and die at any moment. And then through the hypnotherapy, I was taught that it was my own mind making all of those physical manifestations happen, physical symptoms happen. And so in turn, that told my mind that that was also the process to turn it off, to stop it. And so I found that really useful, and I've not really suffered with them since.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So I did that when I was like 19, 20, I think. And then other areas, I think like, you know, my creativity is very much intertwined with fun. My focus, my ability to like concentrate and focus is so motivated by fun. Remember my mum having an argument with the maths teacher because he was like, he just doesn't concentrate and he just doesn't focus. And she instantly replied, was like, well, are you making it fun? And he was like, maths isn't fun. And she went, well, there's your problem.
She's so right.
She was like, I'm really sorry, but if he's not enjoying himself, you've got no chance.
Yeah.
So, and then later I got this new maths teacher and he made it so fun, and I did extra maths. I did additional after-school maths because it was so much fun. So she was spot on, really. And my fashion brand was all about fun. It was about playfulness and personality and colour and character and, you know, parties, and it was all built around fun. So when, you know, I'd had in my early 20s, I had like a breakup or my first heartbreak or whatever, and I was really not having fun and I was miserable, and I found it so hard to be creative. So, you know, I always joke, you know, all these musicians that get heartbroken and write a best-selling album about it, that's not for me. I could not be that person. You know, the creativity does not come from the heartbreak at all. Because when I lost my mum, I was working with my ceramics. I actually found the creativity to be really therapeutic for that kind of pain. So I guess different pain, different outlet. Again, back to my astrology thing, but Geminis, they're often seen as having this split personality, but in reality, we're often very high in terms of like, you know, very happy and, you know, like loud and outgoing, or things like really quite low. Like those are often the duality within that star sign, rather than just being two-faced, which is what people often characterize as being.
So when you're in the quiet time, does that mean that do you spend more time at home? Are you hunkering down a bit more?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. Don't really want to see people, don't really answer my messages, kind of like avoid my phone. But with ceramics being such a solo, like sort of outlet, it's actually something that, again, I quite enjoy doing in those moments. Go to the studios on the weekend and spend time with myself and make some stuff.
Because I thought people might be quite surprised by that, because obviously, you know, we've talked about the more gregarious side of you, the person that's happy to be photographed.
Well, I'm not getting photographed when I'm miserable, am I? So I'm at home avoiding my phone. Or
Well, exactly.
I'm not doing a podcast. No, I think, and to be honest, it's rare. That I'm really lucky. I'm not often in those moments, and I've found and figured out ways to draw myself out of them much quicker. But every now and again, I'll have moments where I'm feeling, and quite often it will be like I'm feeling disappointed in something that's not happened, or it'll just be out of nowhere. I'll be just really tired and run down. It'll come from there. But I've sort of developed different ways of kind of drawing myself out of those, and I'll spend a lot more time with really close friends as well. Is another good one. If you're starting to feel a bit like isolated and like feeling down, the worst thing to actually do is isolate. So then I usually kind of like make a plan to go and spend some time with some close chosen family and do something nice that will, warm my heart up or something. Or I'll go and make some pots. That's actually a really good way for me to get myself out of a funk, is to feel productive. So often if I just go in on a Sunday and do a round of production and make 20 plates, I'll feel so much better about myself because I'll feel productive.
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday. This term outsider energy came to me. And what I mean by that is that so many of the people that come on this podcast felt outside in some way when they were growing up.
Yeah.
Like they were, I mean, you described being bullied, but, somehow adjacent, right?
Yeah.
And with that often comes this energy, and it seems to me you're sort of fizzing with this energy, and you're describing that you have to create and you have to kind of get this energy out somehow.
I think it does stem from that period of my childhood and being bullied and being kind of the outsider and just constantly wanting to be in with the crowd of people that you wanted to be in and wanted to sort of be that person that you were not being allowed to be, maybe. And that manifests itself in so many different ways. And I mean, I definitely have an element of imposter complex as well. And that's something I've done to myself, right? By entering into spheres where I have no, qualification, I guess, fashion and ceramics really, but self-taught in both fields. But it's something that I've learned to not allow in much more as I've got older. For sure, because I think we're all imposters. No one knows really what they're doing, are they?
No, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, and I think these are things you learn with maturity. But when someone tells you you're an outsider when you're young and impressionable, you believe them.
Yeah,
and then when they tell you when you're a bit older and you've got some more life experience, then you don't really have to listen to them as much.
But it's something about formal training, isn't it? You think if you haven't been through that formal training, then you don't deserve to be there somehow.
And I think the way that I've sort of rectified it in my own mind really is that I have like just this intense respect and admiration for anyone who are in these fields that have done that. And I just love kind of watching them and learning from them, and like actually my best way of kind of working is when I'm learning new things. Ignorance is such bliss in especially when building a company, because no one's ever told you how to do something, but they've also never told you how not to do something. So you're not kind of conflicted with these ideas of like, oh, I can't do it like that because that's not how you should do it. So you tend to kind of build structures and processes and ways of doing things that are just the most efficient way for you to do them. And if it goes tits up, it goes tits up. You just don't do it again. You just, and you keep growing from each of those learnings, right? And you're never going to learn as much in a training environment as you are by doing something.
Yeah. You got to get out of your own way sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that I haven't placed any of those restrictions on myself because I've just been like, well, no one's ever told me how to. Let's just go figure it out.
But also, another previous guest on this podcast, John Pawson, who's one of, the great modern architects that this country's produced, is not actually a qualified architect. Yeah. So there's a great example.
Well, that's one of my other ways of thinking as well, is that actually when you are not from a trained way of thinking, you can approach certain things, certain fields from a slightly different point of view, which makes something new and exciting and creates something that wouldn't necessarily have been created by someone that had been taught a more traditional route. And I think that's probably a perfect example of that. Probably doesn't have the same reference points because, he's kind of leaning into more of his own way of thinking and not a way of thinking that was taught.
Yeah. The final question.
Yes.
Yeah. which is the one that I nearly always ask, which is this word home.
Yes.
What does that word mean to you? How would you define it?
Wow. That is a big question. I think home for me is really who's there. Home for me right now is with my husband and my dog. And that can be anywhere. I think that's down to my upbringing and having multiple homes and kind of switching homes quite often. But home for me really is who I'm with and who's in it with me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Henry.
Thank you so much for having me.
Brilliant.
Thanks.